Yeah, so I'm doing some valve lap. I'm using the Permatex sort of multi-grit compound. So I'm just going to drop this in here. I've done the intakes. So the exhaust, you're spinning it back and forth. You can hear it's quite rough sounding initially, and then it breaks into a softer. Now I got to clean the surface here. But basically, it breaks into breaks down the grit as you're using it, and then you're into a softer sound over time. And so I don't have it. I'm sort of kind of burying it up here, but basically, probably better to use the other tool with the smaller grip surface on it, and see if this one works better. So, and it just, you can hear it over time. It's the grit breaks down, and it gets smoother and smoother sounding. But I'm not really making a huge difference. But all I'm doing is I'm just cleaning up the surface slightly, and making sure that I've got maximum results in my leak down test when I'm all done. So see, at this point it's really quiet now. So yeah, I'm just doing that on all the valves, and I'm going to do one final clean of the heads, and then I'm going to reassemble it with the new valve stem seals that I got today. So it should be good. Well, I got the valves all reassembled nicely, and the heads, and then I checked the intakes, and the lash was looking good, just on the bench here. And then on the intake side and the exhaust, I realized I've reversed the valves because I spun the head around, so I got the valves in the wrong order. And my engine builder Josh had been using the technique of shortening the valve stem slightly, grinding the tops of the valve stems to get the lash settings, and so each valve is a different height, so I have to pull the valves out. So I'm learning, and there is a technique rather than bolting down the caps here and having them under pressure that I didn't realize just looking at YouTube, that you can just leave one bucket lifter in place and then just set the cam on top, and then very quickly check each one that way, rather than taking it on and off and having to like tighten it all up and all the bullshit. So I'm learning. So just taking a cam and two lifter buckets and dropping them in, setting the cam on there, way easier obviously, and I think it's more accurate, frankly. I'm getting better, more consistent readings. You can do this without the valve springs being installed. You just gotta be careful to make sure that the valves are pushed up, and as long as the valve stem seals are gripping it, the stem reasonably, then just carefully set the bucket on top, and then you can make the measurement as well, and stick your finger underneath it just to make sure that the valve is fully seated, and then you can make a measurement without even having the valves in. In my case, I'm just going to change the lash caps and tune it that way. So I'm just going to write the last two numbers down here. So a good intake range is 7 to 11, so 9 would be a nice number. I'm slightly low. I want to be in that, let's say 9 would be a good number, like 7 to 11, so set it in the middle, 9, 10, because the engine will eventually, the valves will seat in a bit more, wear a bit more, the stems will move up a bit more, and the gap will close as the engine ages. The exhaust, these are my numbers when I was rotating the cams under pressure, and they're sort of garbage numbers. This is the numbers with the cam just set in loosely. I've got the valves reversed in a couple of locations just by mistake, as I said, and so I can probably swap these two valves with these two valves and reduce the discrepancy. But again, 13 to 18 is a good range, so 15 plus would be a nice place to be. And so again, I mean, I will swap these valves just for sport, just to see what happens, and then I'm going to just order new lash caps and be done with it. Just, you know, get this thing dialed perfectly now that it's all apart. Why screw around? So anyway, there you go. Point I've got to make here is that the journals, the cam journals, they're reasonably rough. And some of them are better than others, but most of them have got some notches in them, and as you can see the way these things are set up, there's a bit of a knife edge at the bottom here. Yeah, it seems to score it a little bit with the high lift cams. So I'm just going to polish up these while I'm waiting for the lash caps. Same thing on the intake side, or this is the exhaust side. Got some rough journals there, so I'm going to clean those up with the, take it, you know, 320, 400, 600,000 plus grit, and get them looking smoother. Yeah, so I'm swapping around the valves, these two exhausts for these two exhausts, because I think those are the ones that I got mixed up, and that'll get me closer to having everything even. And I still think I'm going to change all the lash caps and just give me just a bit more wiggle room, so this engine doesn't need to be serviced again very soon. So bring it up into slightly higher gaps within spec, obviously, and you know, should last for a number of years that way, hopefully. Yeah, sorry for the flicker, but anyway, built this little table. Bottom line is I want to be in the 13 to 18 range. 15 plus would be great. 15, 16, I'm in the 11 to 14 range on the exhaust. And I'm in the 5 to 7 range in the intake, and I should be 7 to 11. So if I change all the lash caps and do the rounding up and all that, I can get myself into 15 to 16 on the exhaust and 9 to 10 on the intake. So I'm going to order those new valve lash caps and I'll be good. So that'd be worthwhile just showing you the left filter is a clean new fuel filter, and the right one, it's about 5,000 kilometers worth of use over a number of years, and definitely gets a little darker looking. So 10 micron filters on the output side of the fuel pump. So anyway, just thought it's worth looking at. So I've got my mini spring compressor and a piece of Delrin doweling that's been machined a little bit to fit around the valve stem, and yeah, it takes about 90 to 100 pounds to get the valve spring to move off the seat position. I have not yet found a way to push with 220 pounds to get it to go to a full half inch of movement, but at 150 pounds it moves just over a quarter of an inch, so these springs are within spec. I'm going to finish testing them all, but the ones I've tested 6 of them so far, and they're all the same, so I don't need to change them. You know, something I was reading about that, and I don't know how you'd get around this, but when you change valve stem seals, you got to be careful not to rip the seal when you push the valve through, and you're supposed to, I mean, I have no idea how you do this, how you insert the valve without, you know, having a piece of tape around it. It doesn't make any sense to me, but I guess you have the valve already pushed up, and then you put the seal around it and never take the valve back out of the head. And before you put the seal down, you wrap a piece of tape around the tip of the valve and stem, and then push the seal over top of it so you don't nick the stem or the seal. But all I've done is just push the valves through once the stem was inserted. Anyway, we'll see. I hope it doesn't friggin' leak because of that. Yeah, I'm gonna I've got some of my new lash caps, just the 7.5 or the 7mm diameter ones. I don't have the 5.5s. They just shipped a few days ago, and I won't be able to finish putting the heads together until that stuff is here. So I'm gonna have to wait a bit longer. I got the ITBs all cleaned up, and this is gonna have to come apart again because I want to replace the valve springs with new springs just in case, and this time protect the valve stem seals with some tape, and put the valve in first and then put the seal in, rather than just hammer the seal on and then push the valve through the seal and maybe rip the edge of the seal with the keeper groove. So anyway, I am an idiot, and I realized I gave Josh back my oil pump priming tool, so I'm going to make another one. An extra gear, machine off the teeth, weld on the socket head, and then I can spin the gear. So waiting for a few parts. I did get another, this is a little bit of a trick. Josh recommends the Mark IV head gasket. It's a little thinner than the Mark III, a little extra compression. So there we go on that front. I'll show you what I'm doing in the garage here in a sec. Oh, I pulled the engine completely apart. In this gear, you will see some damage here on the inside where the crank snout was. So just like I wrecked the pressure plate side, this seems to have developed a bunch of friction, and this has got the optional pins drilled into it. So this gear is damaged. So I'm getting a replacement gear, and BBM in Washington State near me actually machines these things because you can't get them anymore. So they actually make them, which is awesome. I'm just going to have to very carefully re-drill the dowel pin holes for the hardened dowel pins in exactly the right position so that they'll line up with the crank that's already drilled for them. And the crank's in a crank shop right now, just getting cleaned up because the snout here is a little bit wrecked. It's got to be cleaned up. And on the pressure plate side, even though I flat filed it after I'd had the pressure plate bolts spin off, he's just, the crank guy is Warren at Wally Cranks is going to be cleaning up that surface so that there's zero run out effectively. And then, by the way, I got a new ARP ESC tuning, sells them. It's an M16, 54mm long M16 for these 16 valve motors, and there's an ARP bolt that is available that you can put additional 10% torque on, and it's a reusable bolt rather than the factory stretch bolts, which are single use. So looking forward to getting that bolt. That's right, the engine's gone. Someone stole the engine, and it's here. Yeah, there's not much left of it. It's been dropped down. Crank's missing. It's at the crank shop, and yeah, I'll get it freshened up. Some new bearings in it. I'll rehome the cylinders, and it'll be good. Okay, and here's a bit of a mess, but I'm in the process of doing a fifth gear change out. So I'm following the VW broke VW website, and they've given me the new 0.76 gear gear. So I got all the bits here, and yeah, I'm sort of pop off the end cover and then start pulling it apart. So I'm just about to get the puller on here because it won't come off. I'm trying to pull it off, but it won't. So I'm gonna get a puller on this thing and pull the gear off, and then I'll be able to take the circlips off this one, and got a little bit of machining to do. There's a dimple here that I need to cut. And so this is a 16 valve gear. This is a 2Y transmission, and So it's got this groove in the gear that this circlip dimple rides in, and the gear I've got doesn't have that. So I'm going to use this clip or a replacement clip and drill the hole that I need into the gear or the dimple in, so that'll fit. So I'm looking forward to the longer 5th gear. Should be awesome. Well, I had to make a slight mod to my tool to narrow it up so that it would fit around the smaller gear. So they're off now, and I can make this transmission happy with the new set of gears. So the 5th gear swap is complete, except I haven't yet driven down this locking pin. There's a couple of VW parts you need. So this is one of them. This is the other. This adjusts the position of the fork. Drop it on here, turn it. There's a nominal number that says this should be 5 millimeters above this, but what I'm doing here, let me just lie on the ground so you can see. So when the gear is engaged, there's a little bit of slack. And then when you pop it up, again, there's a little bit of slack. So it engages, there's just, it rides free, it's not rubbing. It's not pushing against one side or the other of the collar. Same thing there. So that's ideal. It's a little more than 5 millimeters in height, but you should adjust it not just to the millimeter spec, but so that it's free and clear. Yeah, so let me get up again. You know, this gear swap worked out okay. I ended up, just being for paranoia purposes, I ended up milling out or digging out using a grinding stone because it's such hard material, an equal amount on each side, and this retaining clip pops in just fine. So this is an 8-valve gear being used in the 16-valve transmission, and that's the cheat that VW Pro figured out. So there you go. Yeah, it went back together pretty easily. I tested it, just turning this blind by hand and going and shifting through the gears, and it all seems to be doing what it's supposed to be doing. So I'm going to repaint it and get it all nice before it goes back in the car, but otherwise it's mechanically been updated now. So I am doing something a little strange here. The lighting's better from this angle. So this is the crank sprocket that drives the timing gear that was in the car, and it got a little bit of damage on it. From earlier in the video you can see that. This is a replacement from BBM, and they actually had a machine shop make up a whole bunch of them because they couldn't get the original part. So I had, or Josh, the engine builder, had put some dowel, like hardened steel dowel pins in to help protect this thing from twisting and ripping the key out. So I'm having to use some bolts to bolt this together and align it perfectly, and then drill through the existing holes to line up with the existing holes in the crank. So a little bit tricky, but so far so good. I'm also going to have to machine out, this is machined for an M16 bolt, and this is the, I think M14 or whatever the normal 16 valve is, and this is because of the stroker crank on the TDI, the 95.5 millimeter crank. It's got a bigger bolt. I'm going to show you the bolt I got from, I guess it's from SC Tuning, but they got it from somewhere else. I'll show you. That's an ARP bolt that replaces the one-time use bolt. Well, I was a bit nervous about doing this, but looks like I got it. Pretty much it's aligned to the edges the way the other one is. We'll try it on the crank in a sec. So there's the damage. I could reuse the the sprocket because the pitting is towards the inside. It's not on the outside, so I'm sure it would sit pretty flat. I could always just do a run out. But anyway, I think I got it. I'll find out in a sec. Here's my crank back from the crank shop after getting everything polished up and the ends cleaned up. I had to open the holes up 10 thou. Just they're slightly off. Could be worse, I guess. It's pretty snug though with those pins in there. It doesn't want to move around at all. So the only thing is the pins are 3/4 of an inch long, and I'm going to order 1 inch long dowel pins because they can back out until they hit the edge of the bolt that holds them. And this is the big M16 bolt. Actually, this is the stock one. I've kind of mangled it when we refinished the end of the crank, so I pull this off. Oh, never mind. We ended up having to use that bolt sacrificially. I'll show you the other bolt in a sec. Yeah, so I've needed to open it up a little bit. I didn't have the perfect drill size, so let's make sure it's absolutely perfect run out and everything, so I'm happy. Well, until I guess I have the engine fired up, it's going to be tough to tell if this thing is absolutely perfect. I guess I can mount it with the balancer, with the the damper, and do a run out check on the edge of the damper before I turn the engine on. It seems to be sitting correctly with the old bolt, but it looks like it's level. So here's the Integrated Engineering ARP bolt in comparison to the factory bolt, the stretch bolt. So this is a reusable bolt that you can torque to 78 foot-pounds rather than 66, so you can put a little bit more force on it. I had to cut it down. It was literally you need 20 millimeters thickness here, and it bottomed out at just before 20, which is scary. The other bolt will go down to 18. Anyway, I cut a little bit off the end and profiled it, and it is just perfect now. So that'll work nicely. It squares it up, and I'm happy. Yeah, so I've been using the honing tool, the flex hone, and getting the crosshatch pattern, and it requires relatively slow drill speed and relatively fast up and down movement, but I've managed to get the oil squares out of the way, and I just unbolted them, and then I've gone and done this. There's a few vertical marks where maybe the edges of the piston rings may have scored, or maybe a little bit of piston skirt slap. I didn't try to get rid of every last little imperfection, but they're ready for new rings. I'm pretty happy with the way this tool worked. So I got Ted to fabricate a stronger bracket, so he put some bigger patches on here on the header, and then a much thicker bracket, because I keep on having that getting damaged, and that should support really well now, so very happy with that work. So this is my spring tester. It's a car jack, a platform weight scale, and some bracing. So when you collapse the springs on the the evac race springs, you've ended up with 250 pounds to close the dead coils, and then to get the first inch of compression after that, it's another 250 pounds. So the rear springs are 250 pound per inch, as I said, once they're closed. So I'm at just under 500 pounds of pressure at and it's at 8 inches right now, and then if I bring it back down to 9 inches, it'll be down at 250 again. So there you go. And on the rears, it takes 300 pounds to close the spring, the dead coils, and it's 300 pounds per inch after that. So 250 in the rears, 300 on the fronts. There you go. Yep, so there she is, ready to get put back on top of the block. The valve cover is just loose there, but yeah, she's all buttoned up and ready to go otherwise. Well, things are starting to go back together here in the garage. I'm just putting in new main bearings, and then I'm going to put the crank in. Just finished putting the oil squirters back in and torquing them to the 18 foot-pound spec, and the crank, which is heading into there, is going in a second. So got the crank dropped in there. I'm going to start putting the main bearing caps on and torque them down. The way I'm going to torque them is I got this angle iron. I'm just going to mount it across some of the pan studs, maybe on just one end, and then I'll be able to run it along the side or something, just so I can have something to hang on to as I torque it up. We'll see. So I'm just in the middle of putting the pistons in, and yeah, the rings, the Wiseco rings, gotta get the end gaps in their relative positions and the rings flipped to the correct side up. And in this case, these rings, I didn't need to gap them. I measured them and they're spot on the minimum gap that I wanted. So boom, in they go. And yeah, the pistons are all cleaned up and ready to rock. So yeah, I got the first one in, and there's my piston hammer, and there's my ring installation tool, piston tool. So I'm doing it now. It's excellent. So the pistons and the rods are in. You know, it's funny, I had for 1 and 2, I had the caps mixed up, and it was fumbling around on the bench, and I thought, oh, I wonder if I mixed those two up, because I'd moved them on the bench. And then I went, oh, I guess I'll have to plastic gauge it. So I put them in, and as soon as I started to tighten them up, you know, they didn't want to rotate, and I swapped them, and then it was fine. And now even when they're torqued in, I can just grab this, you know, when everything's torqued down and it moves smoothly. So I know I've got it right this time. So yeah, I'm waiting for the stretch bolts. I realized that I didn't have them in stock for the main bearing caps. So Tectonics has shipped those out today. So I'll get them in a few days, and then I can swap these ones out, and then put the end plates on and seals, and then I can put the oiling system in, and then put this back in the engine bay where it belongs. So I put the new main bearing cap stretch bolts in, torqued to 48 foot-pounds with the 90-degree, and did the ARP rod bolts at 35 pounds with no additional stretch. And then I put the end caps on, hopefully properly, with the using the plastic guide to avoid flipping the lip and damaging the lip. So got both of those in. Used a little bit of sealant on the surfaces on both ends. I'm not going to do the new ARP main crank bolt for the sprocket. I'm not going to tighten it up until I get the flywheel on. So got all that stuff done. So just the EVA motors, most of them came with these windage trays. I got a new one because the last one was a bit gunked up. I am going to run some, I'm going to use some of this Rheinzell Sill universal gasket sealer. I talked to Josh about it. I've had trouble having these oil pans seal up. So what I'm going to do is put a thin layer of this down on the block surface, and then, or probably on the gasket on the bottom side of this, and drop it on, and then without putting sealant on the top, torque it down to spec and let it sit and dry overnight, and then I'll come back and I will put the oil pump in, which is sitting here, and get that all done up, and then I will put one more layer of sealant on, and then drop the pan on. And you know, Josh says, well, the back side of the engine is always getting wet, the front not so. You don't need to use sealant on the front nut. It's a little easier to get the whole thing back off again later if you don't. So just run the sealant up to about here. Some people say you go without sealant and it'll be fine, but experience tells me this stuff rarely seals perfectly, and I certainly, as a street car, want to button this thing up and have it dry. So there we go. Transmission's all pretty. I got a fresh coat of Alumablast Eastwood paint on it, and it's ready to go back in too. So once the bottom of the pan's on, I will flip this thing around, roll it under the car, and lift it into place. And then I'll put the transmission in, then I'll put the cylinder heads on. And there's a bunch of other stuff. I gotta clean this up and do a little bit more. I've scraped a few areas, and I'm gonna just clean it up and retouch up paint a few areas, get the radiator back in, all that kind of stuff, and slowly bring it back to life. So we're making things look more like it's gonna be driving again here. Yeah, so the image tray is firmly attached now, and got the oil pump and pickup and all that stuff all mounted and torqued down. So time to put that on for hopefully the last time in a while. Well, the engine's ready to be put back in. I've just finished scrubbing the crap out of this and washing it all down and degreasing it. And a little bit of touch-up work left to do in the paint, but it's almost ready for things to go back into it now. So just got the heaters drying it all back out, and you can get the wheel wells, everything all beautiful underneath as well. So yep, I'm getting ready to ride this thing soon enough.